Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another tag video for you. I just did one of these recently. I got another one already. And today I'm going to be doing the Lorekeeper's Library tag. This is a tag that was created by Brian from the channel BellTube, which is a channel I'd highly recommend you all go and check out. He does some great stuff over there. He created this tag recently, and I thought it seemed kind of fun, so I decided I was going to do it. I will admit I'm not necessarily as well read as a lot of other fantasy, sci-fi, etc. booktubers, and so I feel like some of my answers are maybe a little repetitive. I'm drawing on some of the same series for different ones, and I wanted to have unique answers for each question, but I did my best to make things a little bit different question to question, and if I could, but I just thought this would be a fun video to do. So the first question is, which fantasy world is your favorite? Now for this question, as well as a few others on this list, I'm not just drawing on books. That's what I'm primarily drawing on, but I do also have a few other things here, which from the couple other people that I've seen do videos on this same tag, they have also not just drawn on books, but that is mainly what I'm going to do. So I have one that is books and non-book media, one that is just books, and one that is entirely not books. So I have three answers for this question because I honestly couldn't pick one. First, pretty obvious one for me if you watch my channel, Star Wars is definitely up there for me. I love Star Wars. I have since literally as long as I can remember. I am 99% sure my first memory is watching Star Wars for the first time. And it's been my favorite setting, or at least one of my favorite settings for a very, very long time. And, you know, I'm very involved in it. I have seen all the movies several times, and I have seen most of the shows. And I've read a lot of the books. I'm still working on reading a lot of the books, but that's like a goal of mine, is to have read at least Star Wars Legends book, and maybe I'll never get caught up on the canon books, because it's possible they'll just keep coming out and I won't get caught up on them, but I would like to get most of those read as well. So Star Wars is a big one for me. As far as a purely book setting, again, should be fairly obvious if you watch my channel regularly, which is The Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson. All of Brandon Sanderson's books that I have read in The Cosmere, or at least most of them, are among my all-time favorites. You know, Stormlight Archive is my favorite series, I would say. Mistborn is very high on my favorite series, and I love all the like standalones, you know, Warbreaker and Yumi and the Nightmare Painter and Elantris and all of them. I think they're all great, and I love the idea of the Cosmere, of this interconnected book universe where everything kind of ties in together and it's all these different worlds and things like that. I just think it's really cool. And so that's also one of my favorite settings. And the third one that I picked is my non-book entirely. You know, Star Wars has books. Cosmere is just in books right now. So my one that has no books, aside from some tie-in comics, is going to be Bloodborne, which is a video game that I adore. The setting and lore for this game is some of my favorite that I have ever come across in fiction. It's like a dark, not super fantasy, like there's not really much like magic and stuff, but it's kind of like a dark gothic fantasy horror with Lovecraftian elements, which just ticks all the boxes for me. I love all that stuff, and just everything about this setting, from the lore to the aesthetic, to just the vibe of it, like as you're playing the game and everything, and just everything about it works for me, and I just love this setting a whole lot. And yeah, it's one of my favorites for sure. Second question is, what magic system would I most like to learn? Which this one is actually very easy for me. Now, as a Star Wars fan and stuff, you might expect me to say, oh, the Force and all that stuff, which, yeah, I mean, the Force kind of accomplishes a lot of things that would be very useful. But in actuality, if I were to pick a magic system that I would like to use, it is Furukami from Mistborn, which I just think, of all the magic systems that I have read or experienced in general, it seems like one of the ones that would be the most practically useful to me, at least for like what I would want to use magic for. You know, using it for knowledge, using it to save up like, you know, different attributes, and things like that. You know, in Mistborn, like, you can save up like health, so if you get injured, you can heal yourself, or save up like speed so that if you need to draw on that to move faster, you can, things like that. I just think it would be a very useful, very practical magic to use. And it is something that I could see myself using in day-to-day life, and things like that. So that's the reason I picked that one. It's probably not a super, like, often picked one. Like, if you're going to pick one from Mistborn, I feel like most people would probably pick Allomancy, because that's like the popular magic system from that series, but I really think Furukami would be super useful in everyday life. Third question is, what is your favorite sci-fi technology? This one is, I had a hard time picking something for this because you know, I don't read a whole lot of sci-fi. I've read a little bit here and there, but not a whole lot. And there's not a whole lot of sci-fi technology that I'm like super excited by. I mean, it's cool for sure, but nothing that I'm like, when it comes to mind when I think favorite. So by default, I picked lightsabers from Star Wars, which Star Wars I personally would consider more of a fantasy than a sci-fi, really. But the technology of lightsabers is probably more so sci-fi than fantasy, I suppose. So this is just what I picked. Obviously, like, it's just got the cool factor, it's a laser sword, and things like that, but I also just like the look of it, both, like, you know, you have this beam of light that is used, but I also love the different, like, hilt customization you can do, and things like that, you know, different designs and different functionalities and things. I just think it's really cool. Next question is, what book has the most epic battle scene? This is another one I had a hard time picking, because I just had a hard time thinking of one. But as I was thinking about it, the one that really came to mind for me was the major battle sequence at the end of Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. I know I'm mentioning Sanderson again, but you know, he's one of my favorites. What am I going to do? And I can't get much into talking about the scene without spoilers, but it is truly epic and awesome. And if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And it was just really, really cool and definitely fits the epic description. Next one is, which fantasy book or series most deserves an adaptation? To go with the obvious answer here, I'm going to say Mistborn, but I do have another one also that I want to mention, or actually two more. But Mistborn, obviously, I'd love to see adapted. That's the one Sanderson's been pushing for. I'd love to see the Mistborn trilogy in a movie format, or even a show format. I prefer a movie format, but I'd be okay with either one. And I think it would adapt very well and be really, really awesome to see. I also would love to see a live action, or at least like a larger adaptation of Deltora Quest by Emily Rada. This is a children's fantasy series that I read when I was a kid, and I think it would make an excellent, like, young adult fantasy adaptation. Something in the vein of like Percy Jackson or something like that. I think this would be great for that style. Like, do like a TV series based on it, where I think you could do a few different seasons. There's a few different series within Deltora Quest, so you could probably do like one series per season. And you know, the first set of books is 8 books, I believe. So you could do, you know, 8 episodes, 1 book per episode, because the books are really short. Wouldn't be too hard, I think, to adapt into like 45-minute episodes, or something like that. So I think that would be really cool to get an adaptation for, because there is actually an anime adaptation, but it's not very well known, and things like that. I think like a more major live action adaptation for this would be really cool. And the last one that I have is kind of similar in that it's technically been adapted, and that's The Chronicles of Narnia. I really am hopeful that the Netflix Narnia adaptation turns out well, because I would love to see all of the books adapted. No adaptation of this series has ever done every single book, which just makes me sad. And I really wish that the one from the 2000s that started out being done by Disney and then transitioned to someone else, I really wish that had continued, because I really loved those 3 movies. But I am hopeful that this new adaptation turns out good. We'll see if it does or not, but I'm hoping it does. Next question is, who is your favorite fantasy villain? Now, this one is also kind of hard for me to pick, because, to be honest, there's not a lot of fantasy villains that really stick in my mind. Most of the time, it's the heroes that I really am drawn to. So picking a favorite villain is a little difficult. So I went with the default answer and I picked Sauron from Lord of the Rings. I think, there's a reason why Sauron is so iconic. Like, I feel like he is the quintessential fantasy villain, and just everything about him, I think, works well for being that kind of villain and things like that. And he's just always been a personal favorite of mine. I think he's really interesting, really cool, and again, kind of just the quintessential fantasy villain. So picked him for this one. Next one is, who is your favorite science fiction antagonist? Now this one I actually went both of these for video games. So the first one that I picked is Darth Nihilus from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. Now, again, like I said, I'd consider Star Wars to be just as much a fantasy, if not more so, than a sci-fi, but whatever. I think Darth Nihilus is such a fantastic and fascinating idea for a villain. This character who is described by the game as a wound in the Force, who literally draws upon the life force of other people to sustain himself. And I've heard several people say things like, if Darth Nihilus had not been stopped, he would have just completely obliterated the entire setting, because he would just be eating the life force of everything, and not everything would cease to exist, basically, and life itself would cease to exist. So absolutely fascinating idea for a villain. Looks super cool, all that stuff. I really like him. The other one that I picked for this was the Reapers from Mass Effect, which is also, I think, a fascinating idea for a faction of villains. These incomprehensible, almost like Lovecraftian in a sense, like these things beyond our understanding that are just gonna come and wipe us out. Super, super cool, and I really enjoyed them a lot as well. Next question is, which book has the most immersive world building? Now, I had several that I could pick from for this, but again, I kind of went with the default answer, and I picked Lord of the Rings. Which, even though it is kind of the default answer, I feel like it is generally like one of the best books that I've read in terms of world building. It does feel very immersive. It feels like you can tell that Tolkien kind of wrote the books to fit the world, rather than the other way around. Like, it feels like he had this world and he was like, I just need to tell a story in this world, and I think that is super cool. And just the cultures and the poetry and everything, as just everything about it just is so evocative of the setting, and it's something that I really love about it. And I've always found Middle-earth to be a very immersive setting, both in the books as well as the other formats like the movie trilogy and things like that. I just think it's fantastically done. Next question is, who is the best chaotic neutral character? Now, this is one that I had a hard time coming up with, because I'm not real good at, this kind of D&D style, like assigning different characters these qualities. And chaotic neutral in particular was a hard one for me to come up with. I feel like, other ones like chaotic evil, lawful good, even like lawful or chaotic good or things like that, like those are all pretty easy. Chaotic neutral is a little tougher. But for this one, and I don't know if this is necessarily a popular pick, like if other people would also pick this character or define him as chaotic neutral, but I personally would, and that is Kelsier from Mistborn, and I have some reasons for this. So first of all, his whole thing in Mistborn is trying to bring down the government. So definitely not lawful, definitely more on the chaotic side of the spectrum, I would say. And while he is trying to do good in a sense of bringing down this evil, tyrannical empire and doing something for the people, he does some rather not good things as a means to meet that goal, and is willing to do some things that are like, it strikes me very much as a kind of ends justify the means type when it comes to certain things. And so I feel like that kind of balances out where, like, yeah, he has maybe good intentions, but is willing to do some not so good things to reach those goals. And so I would consider him to be a chaotic neutral character. Next one is, what is the most underrated science fiction or fantasy book or series? And I picked one series and one standalone. And the standalone's not technically science fiction or fantasy, but it kind of is, so I'm including it. So the standalone is going to be The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. This is a novella, a Lovecraftian novella, which is why I say it's not necessarily science fiction or fantasy, because it's more like horror slash like a historical fiction. But, you know, Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, it's kind of fantasy, kind of sci-fi, so it fits. And I do think it's very underrated. I love this novella a whole lot, and I think that if you are interested in H.P. Lovecraft in any capacity, you should go read it, because it's fantastic. The series that I picked is kind of similar in that it is kind of Lovecraftian, and that is The Elder Empire by Will White. This is one that I am actually finishing up here soon. This is basically like, kind of strikes me as like a flintlock fantasy kind of meets Lovecraft. It has these kind of Lovecraftian creatures in it, which is really cool, and these almost like cosmic horror-esque themes to it in some ways. And it's a really cool series. I have not loved every book in it that I've read. There's 6 books in it, and I am currently in the process of reading book 5. You know, it's a good series. I enjoyed it. I enjoy a lot of the world building in it. I think it's really cool. And Will White is mostly known for his Cradle series, not so much this one. So I think this one deserves some more attention. Next was, what was the most challenging fantasy book you've read? This is an easy one for me. I read the first 1.5 Malazan Book of the Fallen books, and that was definitely a challenge for me. It's weird because it's easy to read in the sense that the reading it isn't that difficult. Comprehending it and putting all the pieces together, that is kind of challenging to me. And so I would definitely say this fits the criteria for me. You know, I say I read 1.5 because I DNF'd Dead House Gates halfway through, which I didn't want to do, but I did. And it's one of those series that I feel like if I were to stick with it and really throw myself into it, would be very, very fulfilling by the end, because it would be a challenge and it would probably be fulfilling in that sense. But it was just a little too much for me at this time. I do plan to hopefully get back to it sometime, give it another shot. But yeah, definitely is the most challenging fantasy that I have read so far. And the final question is to recommend a fantasy book for beginners. This one, again, kind of going with some pretty default answers, but it's one, I think they're defaults for a reason. I think they are good for beginners. First one is The Hobbit by Tolkien. Obviously, I mean, this is like the default answer. I do think it's a good introduction. It is a very classic feeling fantasy, and especially for younger people, I think it's a good introduction because it was written to be more aimed at that kind of audience. But even for adults, I think it's a good introduction, and it's just a fun story. And the other one that I would recommend, again, kind of showing my Sanderson fandom here, I'd recommend Mistborn, which I think is better. Like, Hobbit is good really for all ages, but more so for younger, and for adults, Mistborn I think is a good introduction for fantasy and things like that. I think it's a great book. Is very different from The Hobbit in a lot of ways, but I think I think those two books are very different from each other, so I would actually recommend even reading both of them, because I think they show two very different but two very interesting sides of fantasy. So it kind of gives you a slightly more well-rounded view of what it is, I guess. But yeah, those are two that I would definitely recommend for beginners. And again, I'm not nearly as well read as a lot of other booktubers in this space are, so I'm sure that other people have much better recommendations than me, much more unique recommendations than me, but those are the two that I would point to. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Thank you to BellTube for making this tag and everything. I enjoyed his video on it. I'd recommend go checking it out yourselves. And for any of you who are interested in participating in this, if you would like to leave your answers in the comments, feel free to do so. I'd love to read them. Or if you would like to actually make a video of this yourself, I will try to remember to put the questions in the description. So that is pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.